It's not meant to be a history lesson, and it's not meant to be a history lesson, but rather talk about the future, and towards the end I'll try to talk about more of the possibilities that there are. So I break it into how understandings of the human-shaped architecture, how the trend has continued, and the possibilities for maybe improvement. And we all know the Vitruvian Man. But what I see in this image is more about how later the Vitruvian Man has shaped the architecture. So we divide the proportions and we look at the human as a proportional being, and it's not necessarily about the ergonomics of the person, but just these divine proportions. And then later Corbusier did basically the same thing, you know, with regards to the Vitruvian Man drawing from Da Vinci. The drawing is 500 years later, but looks relatively similar. So to me, there was not much progress. We ended up going from one drawing to another with a bunch of circles and squares. And then Corbusier also kind of broke it up into these proportions, and it makes sense ergonomically if you look at one person, but people are not static and they're not one size, they're very dynamic. And to me, when this comes up, you end up getting buildings that look like this, which are pretty much the same as the drawings. Whether they're actually designed ergonomically or not is not really the point. So, while studying the kind of history and architecture, this Hugo Herring quote came up, and I really liked it. If a man set out without knowledge of planning concepts, but in identification with nature and thus nature-like, he will always act creatively. So I'd like to interpret this as a call against the methods of Corbusier, but not against the use of human in design. If we think of the human as part of nature, like a biological device, that can be studied and simulated and can move beyond the need for developing prescriptive building codes and allow designers and architects to work creatively. At least in America, this did not really happen. And then came this DNA, right? In the 1950s, we find out genes are made of DNA, and then shortly after, the genetic algorithms are created, and then right after that, in the 70s, the first beginnings of shape grammar happen. So the DNA part, in my view, is the modern version of the circle and the square. While the gene represents the building block of the human, it's not really about the human itself. It's more about the cultural understanding we have that humans are made of this thing, and we use this to influence our design. So while we understand that the genes make the hair color and the height of a person and the width of the person's bone structure, we use it very similarly in design in terms of the height and the color of buildings and things like this. But I'm not going to go into shape grammars because there's a lot more experts around here that's going to talk about it in the future. But this is the kind of problem I see with the ADA in America. We went from this standardization of measurements and units, and this is one of the images from the ADA book that tells you how designers should design a bathroom based on a wheelchair. And this is the explanation, currently still being used. But it's not really accurate, and there's one chair and there's one type of disability. So to me, it doesn't make much sense to use this. And it's more prescriptive than performative. So they're telling you this is what to do. And then while I'm doing this PPT, I see this TED lecture, which was last year, called Why the Buildings of the Future Will Be Shaped by You. And the first line of the description actually was, architecture is not about math or zoning. And I was quite surprised by this, because I thought, well, how are you going to shape a building by a person if you don't use any math? And it turns out I was wrong in my interpretation. It meant shaped by you, not for you. So the by is, in the end of the talk, basically you can vote for which buildings you like. And it had nothing to do with the human ergonomics of the building. So for those that are not familiar with BIM, here's a kind of BIM overview very quickly. The issue that I want to have people look at in this is where the people are in the video. In every clip, we talk about like the heating and plumbing, and they can do the design, and we can do energy analysis, and all these kind of great things, glass and all this. But the only people in the video are the ones looking at the tablet and designing it. There's no people in the BIM simulation. So although we can control plumbing and what is beams, columns, structural analysis, all these things are great, but it seems like they care more about how the HVAC system works in the building than how people will work in the building, even if the building was designed for people. So there are some ways to do this. In 1986, this was ISOKIN, one of the first developments in trying to simulate and quantify buildings, based on body motion envelopes. So this is David Lantrip, and he would take a video camera from above, and they were sponsored with NASA as well, looking in small spaces. And they would move and then see like what is the motion of your envelope and how much space do you need to do a specific task. So we can advance, and now we're able to do body scanning and 3D modeling and motion capture, and we can do this like really accurately and get a high resolution work. But it's not really about this, because we would have to do this for every single motion possible, and it's not realistic for every different body type. So we have to start looking at simulation. So this is kind of like a point cloud with forward kinematics, basic forward kinematics that are just showing, and then this is the motion capture. So we can validate that if I was to move my arm in motion capture system, if I apply the same parameters to the person, we can overlay them and we can do it accurately. But designers do use drawings and things like this already for vision. So for vision, this is in the human, Motion of Human or whatever, Dreyfus books. So when we look at these things, it's like really complicated, but it shouldn't be this complicated. And it doesn't make much sense to have someone study this and then go and 3D model a building or try to design a building. But it's quite simple to do this, and all that information can be quite easily processed in like Maya or Rhino or any of these programs. We can do the different envelopes of the eye, we can have it connected to a mannequin, we can automatically find where lights are within the glare range. So if the lights are too high or too low, we can find these things out. So all this is possible. Vision is quite simple. Here's another clip from the book though. If you look at the wheelchair, it's a standard wheelchair, and they're trying to show where the person can reach if they're this height and how it works. But the problem is it's a lot more complicated than this, and I think that for this information, if someone followed this information, there would be two problems that happen. First, the designer would think they're helping place objects in locations accessible for people in wheelchairs. And second, the design would be analyzed based on the image's criteria. But with spinal cord injuries, which are why a lot of people are in wheelchairs, it's not so cut and dry. So if you're not familiar, spinal cord injuries, your nerves in your stem, in the core stem, go through your spinal cord, and then they extend out at different levels. On the right is this diagram. So each section corresponds to the vertebra that the nerves control. So it controls both the touch, the sensation, but also muscles. Which means if you look down here, you have T1 here, and T1 is right around here, right? So if you were to break your T1 vertebra, it would change your tricep and forearm muscle. So this means that someone might be able to use their bicep to pull their arm up, but they can't have any control of their tricep, so they can't stop the arm from falling. So I can go like this, but as soon as I reach here, my arm falls. So I have a very different type of motion simulation. These things are not as well studied and not as well understood, but we understand the nervous system. We don't understand totally the simulations behind it. Another aspect of what we can do with human simulation is kind of this path searching. So we can say, we have some given terrain, and in this terrain I want to analyze how hard would it be for me to move from one side to another. So it's not just about a path finding algorithm that is looking from what is the shortest path, but also about if I have some difficulty, if I have a wheelchair, where's the ramp, the easiest way to go up the ramp? If I'm elderly, how hard will it be to walk on uneven surfaces or double curved surfaces, things like this. So we can change the resolution and things like this. So for this kind of situation, this is the building scale. It's not all about the ergonomics of a single person. This is human simulation, human factors on a large scale, which is if I have an airport, how much energy is going to take from going from the terminal to the gate or from the security check to here, wherever it is. In this case, it's about how much land do I need to excavate in order to build my building and still make it comfortable for other people to walk in the building. What if I have crutches? If I'm on crutches and I'm in a building, do I walk to the other side of the building to get the elevator to go up to the second floor, or do I use the stairs? Same thing for elderly people. We need to analyze and understand human motion and human ergonomics and human movement like this. I'm passionate about this because this is outside of my house in Korea. Korea is made out of mostly mountains, right? So we have to destroy a lot of land and flatten a lot of land in order for us to build a building. It makes it really difficult and expensive. And then these kind of like random ramps happen everywhere. And I took these pictures yesterday morning. This is my house, right, outside, and you can see nothing is straight at all. There's no logic to how it was built. It was just built because, if you see, we're on a big incline up here, and it also curves up in this way. So we just build the bricks however we can. There's another view from this problem, right? Okay, so now I start to think about biomimetic, because this is another aspect to biology and human simulation. But to me, we talk about biomimetic in terms of bio-inspired, smart materials, yet we still barely understand humans. Who are the ones using the buildings in the end? So if the goal is to find inspiration from nature for buildings, I propose that we focus on the human body. It's one of, if not the most complicated biological organisms that we know. We have the brain, we have the nerves that go out the spinal cord, we have the combination of skeleton, organs, and skin. And the skin is holding in place all these things. So we have these soft materials with hard mechanisms, the bone structures and things like this. When we look at BIM, I feel like we can restructure BIM to start understanding things more like the human. We can get the inspiration from the human and say, what if we had connected systems? If it wasn't just about the HVAC system placed here and then biomechanics like this, right? So here's one of my colleagues working on something called synergy mapping, right? You take the motion capture, and he has markers on his hand in motion capture, and it's streaming into the robot. The problem is he has 4 fingers, 1 thumb, and the robot has 3 fingers, 1 thumb. So how do you map them directly? Because the motion is not the same. And there's this thing called synergies, right? And that's why at the bottom it says the proposed algorithm uses only first 2 synergies. It's a really simple algorithm because there's 2 theories on this, either neurological or kinematic, right? So we either move our hand almost the same way every time when we grab objects because it's either a neurological trained system or it's kinematic. I feel like it's more about the kinematics, and I'll show you why. For a good morning video, here's how your hand is inside. So these are your tendons, and as you can see, by just pulling 1 muscle, your hand moves, just like the motion capture was showing. So I feel like if we understand more about the biological systems, we can start thinking more about how we structure buildings. If your building had some kinematic structure, some combination structure in which the snow that came down, it blocks the snow and at the same time allows for heat to transfer in a more efficient way. If the systems were more integrated, this would be great. But we don't know a lot about people. And here's kind of the research I'm proposing, this kind of basic research of architecture. So we talk more about basic science, basic research when we apply for funding in terms of physics and chemistry and these kind of things. I'm more looking into what I would consider basic research of architecture, which is the parts of architecture that other people do not want to study. Where I work, we have biomechanics and robotics, and I'm the only person that has any degree in design, architecture, or anything like this. When I talk to people, like one of the projects I'm working on is robotic tiling. We're having the robots do construction on site tiling instead of prefab. We're trying to do integration into the buildings. And the robotics professor, who's one of the top in Korea, not as good as KAIST because they won DARPA Robotics Challenge, congratulations. But he says to me, don't they just take a giant sheet of tiles and just lay it down with a crane? So in his mind, the robotics people, they cannot understand why anyone would want to do robotic tiling or fabrication on site because everything just comes in a large sheet and all neatly places wherever it is. No one has to cut and measure or anything like this. So we need to start posing and thinking about architecture in a way that we look at biomechanics and not just say, well, eventually the biomechanics people will figure it out. Eventually the biomechanics people will understand how much energy it takes to go from one side to the other because they actually don't know these problems exist. And if you talk to them, they might still not see the reason for why they need to be solved. So some things that I've been working on in this area is the human. We're improving the access to biomechanical models. So if you know about Nexus, there's the conventional gate model. So we did a Python, open source Python version, and it's exactly the same results within 10 to the -6 equal to Nexus. So it's on GitHub if you guys want to access that. right now we're working on, this is just the first step, but it's if we can take these biomechanical models and we can start to open source them instead of having to pay for the software, start to understand how the models work, increase computation performance, then we can start bringing it into the architectural space. If right now, we can't have high performance, high computing, massive amounts of data of motion capture that we need for the architectural realm. Yeah, so where does it end? I think maybe if we look at architecture more, there's embracing the multidisciplinarity. So the same way that engineering has mechanical engineering, computer science, electrical engineering, civil engineering, all these aspects, maybe architecture should start to think about bringing all these aspects together as well and having the biomedical architecture, just like we have computational design in architecture, but looking at these other fields, but specifically for the aspects of architecture, which are actually quite unique in the large building scale. And that's it. Thank you.
Just one case. For example, for the human-based design, did you think about the different sex or the ages or the physical things? For example, those are a lot of differences, and to get all the information to react in the space, how can you simplify those informations?
Yeah, right. So there's the big problem, which is what the problem with the ADA standards and these things are, which is assuming one type of height, one body person. But ergonomics has already dealt with a lot of these issues. There's a software, if you guys know, Technomatics Jack, right? And it has all these different ways of simulating people. So what I think is we need to be able to have the simulation available across genders, across sizes, across ages. But a lot of this we don't know, which is the problem. We really, biomechanically, ergonomically, the research is not done in order to be able to simulate it. Once we can start to simulate it for individual people and then span across and we have like a nice little slider, then we can start to quantify our buildings for the accessibility based on different people. So we could say, someone can reach this light bulb if they are maybe ages 8 to 12, kind of like video games, right, or something. You have some ranking system, some scoring system that helps the designer understand their building. That's why I'm proposing BIM should be implementing more of these things, that your designer could understand the same way HVAC has a color map of where your energy efficiency is going. We can do this for humans and say, here's your color map of how everyone can access, you know, this wall right here, but the wall up here only really tall people can, right? Something like that. Is that it?